interpreter
Welcome
today.
and good morning and good day, wherever in the world you are viewing us from. This is Michele Price here at Startup Grind Houston. We love the fact that we are willing to experiment and expose you as well as us to new ideas, new people, and new ways to learn how to revolutionize communication and build community. You guys already know we're the only chapter now who gives the mic only to women, Indigenous, Black, LGBTQ, Latin, AIP, neurodivergent funders and founders. And so, you know what? Because we live by the values that Startup Grind Global presents, and that is make friends, not connections, help others before you help yourself, and give first. Today, our gift is we're bringing you Dr. Stephanie Cawthon. And one of the things I forgot to do before we clicked to record was I forgot to ask her how to pronounce her name. So, yes, I make mistakes too. One of the things that stood out to me is I found her on LinkedIn. So if you guys aren't there, there's a lot of really great things that are happening on LinkedIn. She is a deaf researcher, author, speaker who is a professor at the University of Texas in Austin for the Educational Psychology Department. So I'd like to ask you, teach me how to pronounce your last name pretty please, since I forgot to ask that.
Well, I'm not entirely sure how to say it, but my guide for you would be to think about coffin, the box coffin, and replace the F's with a TH.
Cotton. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. So, you know, one of the things that we've discovered in being willing to ask questions that a lot of times aren't being asked in the startup space, or they're just a new area that startup founders are looking at exploring. Would you share with everyone who's tuning in to listen to you today? First, I know you've got a book coming out. Can you tell us what made you choose to write this book? And what is your hope that people will do with it and from it?
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me here with you today. I really appreciate this. For all of the listeners, I'd like to give you a warning. I'm using American Sign Language right now, so the voice you're hearing is that of an interpreter, not my own. So I just wanted to put that out there. And secondly, thank you. Like I said, thank you for having me. Thank you for giving me the chance to be a part of your community in the startup world. It's such an integral part of the rest of the world, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. One thing you asked me about was the book itself. And I think a good place to start is the topic or theme of the book. And the title is Disability is Human, with a colon. Vital power of accessibility in everyday life. And so that's important to me because so many people don't realize just how many others have disabilities. It's 1 out of 4 people will have some type of disability. 1 out of 4, that's 25%. So if you think about all of the umbrellas of disability, think about physical disabilities, that's pretty common. We are also pretty familiar with learning disabilities. Then there's mental health. Now, during COVID, those numbers increased exponentially in the mental health space and those challenges that many people experienced. And I think many people don't realize what has been impacted thus far and what will continue to be impacted in those different ways. And then also health. Lots of these things impact physical health, cancer, for example. any type of ongoing condition, any symptoms that you experience impact so many people in our community, and it's young and old alike. Age is irrelevant in a disability discussion. And so, what I often tell people is that disability is pretty common. 25% is a large number. And then, if you want to include the entire population, or if you are targeting a specific area, really consider disability as part of your demographics. So that's kind of my first point, is just to make that point, as that most people don't understand how prevalent disabilities are and how different they can be. The second thing is accessibility. It's not always about the legal requirement. Now, we do have a law in place that requires accommodations and accessibility, and that often scares people. That's intimidating. But there's so much that we can do in terms of accessibility that doesn't have anything to do with the legal requirements. Some simple things that you can implement on a daily basis. For example, when we started our Zoom today, captions were on. They were immediately available. And for me, they're always on. That's just a simple thing. That's not required by the law, but it's a simple thing that anyone can do. Just turn them on and make them available. Many, many people benefit from captions being available. A person who identifies as having a disability or one who doesn't. It's been proven over time that that is a benefit to everyone. Another example that I often mention is when we include stories and perspectives of people who have disabilities. That is really great. It really can improve your production, your process, and it bolsters your understanding of who you're designing things for. So those aha moments are very critical. And it's not always a big thing. Sometimes it's a small little thing. One story that I like to tell is that I have a student here at the University of Texas at Austin, here at UT, and she started out as a chemistry major. And she went to the lab here on campus. I think it was about a 4 hour lab. That's typically how it's assigned. And so she went to the professor and said, Hi, so I'm not able to stand for 4 hours. I've got multiple sclerosis and I can't stand for those 4 hours in the lab. And the person there said, Well, I'm sorry, you can't have a stool. You cannot have a chair. People who are in science have to be able to stand for at least 4 hours, was the response that she got. I was taken aback. That's not legally required, a stool. That's not anything. But the attitude behind the response, the perception, or the options of what's available or what's even possible, that I just tell that so people understand some of the little things that happen every day. And stories like that do happen every day. The kind of can't attitude or the limiting, we haven't, so we can't, and setting these big, wide boundaries of what's impossible, that's not a really creative mindset. And I think people with your creative mindset and in your space, in your startup world, you're very creative. And I think that that helps us say, you can be creative. Use that part of your brain. Let's dig in there and make things more accessible. And how can we do it? So that goes going back to your question. That's why I wrote the book, for all of these things.
Thank you. You know, when I was thinking about this topic after watching one of your videos, I found myself just thinking about the founders, one who come to us and ask a lot of questions because they're early in the space and they may have thoughts and ideas for how to solve a specific problem, which is why they have a startup, but they don't typically have the leadership or the communication skills that'll allow them to create a full arc of success for what they're doing. And so that's a big reason why I wanted to have you come talk to us today because I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about the questions I've heard founders ask and concerns they've expressed over the past 10 years we've been a chapter. And a lot of times, people in new leadership roles tend to think we're small, so we don't need to think about doing anything for all the exceptions. They see disability as being an exception. And I'd like to hear more from your experience and your expertise. If you were to be talking directly to a new founder today and they're contemplating how do they create an environment where their solution can succeed, but their people can succeed as well, because they're starting to understand both are necessary.
So for that, that's a good question. One thing that I've noticed is people who start up new small businesses really have a lot of energy, lots of energy, and they want to be in the places that have the most impact. And access doesn't always hit the checklist, right? It's not always there. In fact, often access is more about attitude and open-mindedness than specific things that you need to do on, as I say, a checklist. It's not really a to-do list, it's more about an attitude. So one thing I encourage people to do is to really think about their relationship with disability, their experiences, maybe growing up, someone in their family, a friend, themselves, and kind of unpack that a little bit. What does disability mean to them on a personal level? And why? Because when you think about your potential clients, your potential employees, and disabilities come up in those groups, what might your first response be? Because it will be ingrained in those experiences and in the perspective that each of you, us, have in disability. So if you kind of take a step back and you're thinking about what's required, what's the to-do list, what do I need to do? Go back further than that and think about what it means to me. Okay, let me pause. What does disability mean to me? How do I feel about it? Because disability and our thoughts on it are never neutral. And it's never neutral. There's nothing about it that is neutral. So I'd like to acknowledge that right here from the get-go, and that's okay. It's fine. We expect that. So let's acknowledge how we feel about it. You know, people who are in this space talking about disability and access for the first time, I really do ask them to pause and just take a step back. Let's just talk about disability. What does it mean? Let's unpack it. This is a safe space. Let's get to it. And again, I like to acknowledge that it won't be neutral. There, you will be on one side of the fence or the other. And then in addition to that, access is a continuum and it varies. There's no final goal. You've arrived. It's not a destination, it's a journey, and it's about growth and walking through that. And so if you're in a startup, you're also thinking about growth, right? That's what you're doing. So it really lines up with that. It's very parallel. You think about the why for the startup, let's think about why for access, because it really runs alongside. Again, it really goes back to that creativity and growth mindset. And I do think that they go hand in hand. And then I guess the third thing that I would say, I've already sort of touched on it, is think about your target audience, your client. Who are you inviting into your space, into your world? Again, 1 in 4 people have disability. So if you care about those individual customers or clients of yours, you will automatically be caring about disability.
And that's usually one of the first things I'll hear founders say to me, though. They'll say, well, our solution is not designed for people with disabilities, or they are not our customer. And my first response to them is, how do you know that? Who have you talked to? Because advisors are continually telling, especially new founders, have you talked to 100 people? And now with the data that you shared with us today, I wonder, I wonder about challenging them to talk to people outside their own circles. Because another thing I've watched is people will tend to talk to folks they already know inside their circle, and they may get an introduction here and there to someone outside their circle. But if they've insulated themselves, or if people don't feel like they're a safe person to even self identify their disability, how are they going to know really important things they need to know when creating their solutions so that people with disabilities will want to buy it?
Yeah, well, I have four things to say. Let's see if I can remember all of them. So social media design, that it's designed to create that bubble that you referred to. And so we have to be really intentional and break that bubble. Search for hashtags with disability, hashtags with access. So many people with disabilities, uh, content creators, they're out there. They're out there and they're doing a lot of content. And so often you have to be intentional about reaching out to those people. And so I included disabled content creators in my book. I did some spotlights on some of them. And so people have to have some place to start. And I think it's good. And I think so I really kind of gave a list of people to check out. There's a lot of stuff that is applicable to technology, a lot. And it's out there. You just have to search for it. And like I say, be intentional. Another thing that you said that was really important is about disclosure. You touched on that and self-identifying and will a person or won't they? And so when we think about disabilities, most of the time it is not a visible or obvious disability. More often than not, you don't or won't know that a person has a disability. 70 to 80% of disabilities are invisible, or those that you cannot see. They're not evident. Without someone saying, hi, I have a disability and this is what it is, without a blatant disclosure, you don't know that they have a disability. Most of the time, you don't see people saying that out in public, right? There's a negative connotation that goes along with it. So that's not just always out there. So keeping that in mind. And also maybe understanding that maybe that's not the first question you say, like, hi, nice to meet you. Do you have a disability? We probably don't do that. There are ways that you can check in with folks outside of your circle and maybe find a way. And maybe later on, after some trust is built, there's some rapport there, then kind of check in. There's some questions that are appropriate to kind of navigate that. There are ways to approach it. And so that's where I find it's super helpful to have the language that's relevant and safe to approach it. Again, that's an entire section of my book, The Language of Disability, how to approach what you say, what you do, what to say, what not to say, what to know when going into making those decisions, even on a linguistic level, those language choices. The fourth thing that I wanted to touch on is I wanted to remind people that when you want to get the perspective of a disabled person, you have to pay for it. It's not free. Should not be free when you really want that. If you're contacting a content creator and say, hey, I want your expertise. I'd like to hear your story. Could you review my stuff, my content? That should be a fee for service because it's not always their job, but it is something that they are an expert in, and there's value in that. And so I'd like to just remind people of that.
I know one of the questions that has surfaced whenever I've had conversations with founders, especially, and they also find themselves butting heads with funders because funders want them to take the easy way, but founders will end up discovering that they've got talent that they want to work with or that they want to hire, but they're still coming in with the I'm new, I'm small, I don't know how to handle this. We don't have an HR department. What can we not do? Their whole mind starts spiraling around that. What advice would you give a founder when there's someone they want to work with, but they've been scared off in hiring them because they're worried they're going to break a federal law?
Sure. There are plenty of lawyers who have expertise in federal regulations, some with disabilities themselves. I recommend finding someone in that field, ask them to review your work. Maybe they can support you in your endeavors. I am not an attorney, and so I don't want anyone to say, Stephanie said this, thus it's legal. Not true. It's not true. Just my experience and opinions. However, there are a lot of people with expertise in that field in the legal arena, and they do work for new startups. They do work for nonprofits. Um, Often community-based organizations have attorneys available for these specific questions. So if you don't know, look for that information with these things in mind because it is available. Um, or take a gander at the law yourself. You could take a look. That's available, just to see what it says and see if you can navigate that. But I understand that, right? It's a lot to handle. It's a lot to navigate, but there are some basic guidelines available out there as well that can kind of break it down and help folks in that space. Another thing is when we think of, oh, like the HR, I love the HR question or the response, I don't have HR. What do I do? For, often for startups, right? It's like, it's just me. It's a one person show. So I think my advice then is think about flexibility. Can you show some flexibility? Ask some curious questions. Ask the employee, what do you need to do your job? How can I support you? How do you feel like you can be a success in this space? Those are the best places to start, I think, with disabled people because often they know what they need versus trying to push something. I think be direct and flexible, figure out what's possible and what you can do. Oftentimes, there's some technology available to support the process as well. I love technology for startups and technology startups who are focused on technology because it's all about solutions. It's already a part of the solution, and that's what we all need to focus on is finding those solutions. So it's a great meeting spot, right?
What would you like to leave listeners with today from our conversation that either maybe I didn't think to ask or something that you think would be not just important, but you'd like to encourage them to take that red thread into their life?
I think that the people who are here listening today value social justice. I mean, obviously, your goal, your priorities, you've demonstrated that. And disability is a part of that goal and the big picture for who can be part of the community and what's possible. And so I think that for me, accessibility is a learning curve. Absolutely. Never finished. We're never done. And that's okay. I think if we accept that from the very beginning in square one, I think there's a whole lot of people out there at square one and where you're at. You're not alone if that's how you're feeling today. And for me, that's just the most important thing is finding other people. Follow us. I'm on LinkedIn. There are tons of people on LinkedIn who really who really speak to what to do that would fit your context really, really well. So I think that that's sort of my number one piece of advice. And then secondly, if you want to reach out to me directly, absolutely. I've got a monthly newsletter. I share ideas and stories. Then of course the book itself will be released in the fall. So there are a lot of resources out there and I encourage people to tap into those.
Well, thank you for telling us when the book comes out, because that was going to be the last thing I asked before we just kind of closed our conversation today. So that's it, guys. It's available in the fall, and hopefully pre-sales are a possibility maybe sometime this summer. I know publishers tend to like to control that timeline because I used to interview a lot of New York Times bestselling authors on the radio show. One, I want to thank you so much for understanding that we're creating really different conversations in the startup community. So for your willingness to come and join us in those conversations and show us ways that we can learn how to be more inclusive leaders, that's one of my personal goals. So I'm hoping that more startup founders also feel that way. Thank you. And you guys, we appreciate you tuning in to us every month. And remember, you can always not just connect with our guest today, but connect and say, hey, Michele, you talked about, blankety blank. Can you bring on someone who will talk about another topic? Or if there's a specific um, person in the business space that you want to hear from that meets that criteria that we give the mic to, then let us know and we'll be happy to bring them on Startup Grind Houston. Again, we look forward to talking to you next time. And anytime you're in Houston, give us a ring.